behaving differently online?
It's not so much that they're behaving differently as much as that we have a sense of visibility that we've never seen before. So we're used to being able to see a certain group of kids in certain places, right? The mall, we can see kids hanging out with their friends that way. But as adults, we don't typically have a really good sense of all the kids and a good sense of where they are and what they're doing when they're with their friends. What's going on online is, in many ways, it's youth space. So they're there, they're goofing around as though they're there just with their friends. And so what ends up happening is you can get a sense of what's going on really in broad sweeps. And it isn't just the kids like the kids in your community, but the kids who are in different communities all around the world with all sorts of different ideas of what is normative behavior, right? And that what is normal, what is common really differs. And so we see these behaviors online and we're like, oh my gosh, it's radically different today than it ever was before. It's not really.
Well, I was going to ask that actually. How different is it from like when I was a kid, I'd come to the mall and I'd do stuff at the mall or I'd go to the movie theater or whatever. How different is it?
Think about what happens when you were doing that with your friends, right? You were there, you were joking around, you were gossiping, you were flirting, you were kind of consuming culture and consuming merchandise. But it was part of this all-encompassing social experience. The same thing is actually happening fully online, right? So all of those everyday practices, the gossip, the flirting, the joking around, that's taking place online. And it's taking place online with the same kinds of friends that took place in the mall, right? You met up with all the kids at school, but you also saw the kids at the neighboring school, and you're like, hey, who are you? What's that about? That same thing is where we're seeing it play out. So young people who are engaged online, they're primarily engaged with the people they already know. They're friends from school, they're friends from after-school activities, they're friends from around.
So, regardless of whether you think, social technology and the internet is good or bad, it is. This is what, the genie is out of the bottle. And I think that's an amazing thing. The social web can do more good in the world than it can do bad. And it's the choice of people and the people who are using it as to what they want to do with it. It is the most empowering generational shift that has ever happened. And I think that is what makes it so compelling and so inspiring and so much fun. When you look at the fact that you can be sitting in your pajamas on your couch and help drive, world peace. That is actually happening today. That's possible in a way that it was never possible before. And I think that that's something that is incredibly important. So, does it mean that people have shorter attention spans? Yes. But is that a bad thing? Maybe, depending on what your point of view is. But in terms of what it can actually enable socially, economically, and politically, I think that we should embrace and welcome social technology, not fear it.
Look at the devolution of the way we represent ourselves online has devolved from the quirky, personalized HTML web page, homepage of the 90s, to the somewhat modular but still strange presence of a MySpace page, to the completely formatted and market-friendly presence of a Facebook page. What we've done is moved from personal, human, open-ended self-expression to completely market and computer-friendly, regimented and conformist expression. And that's because we've turned the net from a venue for self-expression to a way to render ourselves up onto the market.
About the safest place to stay forever.
As a result, the internet does not foster humanity. The internet is about human beings conforming to the needs of technology as understood by the market, rather than human beings getting technology to extend and express what it means to be a human being. And that's why the net has moved from being part of the human potential movement to part of the really anti-human movement.
How young people relate to each other.
I think it's provided a means to stay connected at much closer quarters for much longer periods of time. So classically, the statement is that the kids bring the playground back with them in the evening. So in a sense, their local friendship groups are more persistent. They last longer. And that brings benefits and disbenefits, I think. Well, I'm a professor of computer science, so I see people who naturally want to get in and develop the systems, take them to the limits. And their whole interest in doing this and ability to do it is hugely accelerated by the presence of the web, because they can form communities, they can exploit open source software movements, they can be much more creative individually than they would be, collectively than they would be on their own. The challenge is a little bit, though, that it's quite easy for them to reach for other solutions. So we have to guard against that, I think, a lot in the way we teach and develop their own research skills.
So is it the web?
I think we already see, my experience of this is we already see students who have a very acute sense of the requirement to be critical about the material they're seeing, just because the web is full of a huge amount of material, some of questionable provenance and origin. They have to take those lessons on board very early. So in a strange way, although there is more out there, it's requiring them to be more self-critical about how they should use those sources. And I think that's a hugely important skill in thinking that we've always been trying to convey to students.
Generation has a sense that information wants to be free and information about themselves wants to be free. And in a way, there's a kind of self-surveillance that I think that young people don't think about. People put their lives on the screen. They put really intimate details of their lives out there, and with very little thought that there might be people using that information in ways that are not benign. I did an interview with a 16-year-old that is precious to me, because he talked about how he knows that people, can read his email. He knows that people somehow, he senses that his texts are being saved in some server in the sky. But he, when he wants to have a private conversation, he goes to payphones, and he feels that payphones are the only safe place for him to talk. I mean, you have this sense of even young people looking for the interstices of the system to find a little privacy. I don't think this is good. I think that, my grandmother, who came from a European background, taught me how to be a citizen at mailboxes in New York City, where she brought me down to the mailboxes. She said, she said, it's a federal offense to read somebody else's mail. I don't know where to take my daughter to teach her that. When we go through the Mass Pike and there's Easy Pass, my car is tracked, there are surveillance cameras all over. We're both giving up unprecedented amounts of information in profiling. I think that it's hard to teach the relationship between privacy and democracy, and it's also hard to teach the relationship between intimacy and privacy. What is intimacy without privacy? I think this is really a question for this generation.
What's interesting is that the information.
You start to want to hide. I mean, at first, it's all good. It's all good. I'll give you, you get this kind of what seems like a virtuous cycle of more and more and more. But as we see what this generation looks like as it grows up with it, they're now a generation in retreat. They'll text, but they won't talk. It's not all good. It's not all good. A slave to your email. In a way, I see people defining a successful self as a self that can keep up with its email. So there's kind of a velocity and a volume.
There's a massive generational difference in how people see the web, and that's one of the things that I find most interesting and exciting, not only just between classic generational breakdowns, but much more split and atomized fragments of early 20s to late 20s to mid 20s. It's more about kind of the stage of life you're at as well, I think, and where you are in the education cycle. If I look now at how 8, 9, 10-year-olds use the web, it's completely different to how somebody aged 18 would use it, completely different how I would use it again. And I think that one of the issues around the privacy questions that are now being raised are, have we taught children how to be safe online enough? And are we, aware enough, if we've come at this later with technology, of all the different ways that information is used? So there's definitely a piece of education that needs to underpin all of the developments that are happening in technology.
Social vulnerabilities. So, how do I make certain that I don't get teased, harassed, bullied because of the things that I make available out there? How do I make certain that what I put out there makes me seem cool and not lame? How do I balance that? So the social vulnerability is the privacy fight for young people. The physical and psychological is the fight for parents. And so we see these two constantly at odds, because part of putting things out in public is to achieve status, you need to actually make yourself vulnerable at a certain level. And how do you actually do that in a way that balances the risks and the benefits?
I think that social media is interesting. Would you stick a picture outside your house? No, probably not. But you are always framed in social media context in a world that you create. You don't have to accept people as your friends. You don't have to let the whole world see it. It's not really anonymous in the way that I think sometimes people get scared that it is. I think this all comes back to education, and it's all very well for me to sit here in my mid to late can I bear it 30s. Actually, you need to look at what 11, 10, 9, 8-year-olds are doing and how they're interacting with technology. And for me, they're the people that both can teach us but also need to be educated themselves. And this is where I agree with Tanya Byron's report about technology, that it's all good and to be embraced, but you have to underpin it with proper education about exactly those issues of identity and power.